What up? Old man shouting at clouds. How you guys doing today? Topic of today's video is travel. The importance of travel, boys and girls. So this has been a cathartic one for me in my life. When I was a kid, we traveled around the United States a bit in the car. We didn't fly much. It was expensive then. It's expensive now. But we did drive around the U.S. a decent amount. At first, we were really just driving, making road trips to Ohio and back, because that's where a lot of my family lived on both sides, my mom and my dad's side. So we made a lot of, shout outs, Ohio. We made a lot of trips there, but that for a while that was mostly it. We didn't go a whole lot of other places. But then we started to expand. We'd make road trips out west, down south. And, my parents were kind of trying to expose us to what the rest of the country's like. But we didn't do a whole lot of international travel. I think the only international travel I did with my parents was, maybe we went to Niagara Falls and we're on like the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. So not a lot there. Although we did actually go to, we went to Vancouver Island. We went to Victoria as a family at one point. So we did actually do a little more than just Niagara Falls. But again, it's a very touristy area. So not a whole lot of exposure to a different culture, but we tried as much as we could as a family. So that was my travel journey up until the time I left high school. I hadn't really been abroad too much. I take that back. My grandparents did take me on a Caribbean cruise when I turned 16. So I had been off of United States soil and not just to Canada. But you don't really get immersion on a cruise. It's a week-long party. So not really what I'm talking about for the purposes of today's video. So the first time I actually did travel abroad, I went all in. I studied abroad for a semester in Santiago, Chile. So I was there from late January, early February, something like that, until late June, early July. So I was there for 5-6 months and lived down there with a host family. Spoke Spanish, learned to be pretty fluent in Spanish. And, in 5 or 6 months, you definitely get exposed to a different culture. And Santiago, Chile is not like next door. I went far. It was like an 8 or 9 hour flight from Dallas to Santiago. And that was my first. I had never been to Europe. I had never been to, I don't even think I'd been to Mexico at that point. Had not been far afield, and I jumped in with both feet. And I spent probably the first month at least wondering what I had done, feeling like I had made a huge mistake. I was super uncomfortable, didn't love the food at the time. It felt completely untethered. Didn't have a lot of friends that were there with me, so I felt very alone and isolated and uncomfortable. But as time wore on, I got more comfortable with the language. I started making friends, and by the time it was time for me to go home, I wasn't ready to leave. I actually wanted to stay longer, but I believe by the time I boarded my flight back to the United States, I had $10 left in my checking account. So it was time to go. Whether I wanted to go or not, it was time to go. So what that one decision did was kind of changed my entire perspective on travel. Before, I can almost divide my life into before and after I went to Chile. And what I was like before that was somebody who kind of stayed in his comfort zone. Okay, I went to college in the town I grew up in. Now, granted, the college I went to is a very good college, so, getting accepted there wasn't a bad decision to go, but it was in my hometown. So I didn't really get out of my comfort zone there. And going to Chile was the first time that changed, that I really took a risk and did something that put me out of my comfort zone. And it was life altering. I went from playing it safe and not taking any chances to taking big swings in life. I ended up doing an Ironman triathlon and running marathons and doing an ultra marathon and taking some risks in my career. And I can trace a lot of it back to that trip. And I also speak a second language now, which is awesome. That's very useful. It helped me a lot when your mom and I went to Spain. So now that's not the only way to get out of your comfort zone, but travel is something that I highly recommend to almost anybody because it does a few things that are kind of hard to get elsewhere. So I'm going to list those things out. This is actually a slightly more organized video than I've done in the past. So I'm going to consult my notes. 3 things. Let's not pretend I'm not reading here. So, what does travel do that I find is not something you can accomplish as easily through other means? 1, gets you out of your comfort zone, which I've already mentioned. 2, it can really make you value what you have now. I'll expand on all of these, but 3, you can learn new perspectives and you can add new tools to your tool chest. So, what do I mean by all of that? Well, I've already kind of gone into the value of getting out of your comfort zone, but that's a super important one because life is going to require you to get out of your comfort zone many times. The more you practice it, the better you'll get at it, okay? And doing things that really stretch your boundaries is a great idea because you realize that you're capable of handling it, for one thing, and you just get better at ad-libbing. You get better at making things up as you go and figuring it out and just being adaptable. So I think that's a super, super, super critical one. And then next up, I definitely want to talk about what it does for you in terms of valuing what you have at home and like just understanding that the world is not the same as where you live. So I'll use myself as the example here. So growing up where I did, Madison, Wisconsin, pretty sheltered. It's a very nice area. Not a lot of terrible stuff happens in Madison, Wisconsin. It's pretty affluent. Just a lot of friendly people. It's very Midwestern. And that's where I grew up. That's where I went to college. So I had very little exposure to anything else prior to that. Well, when you go to South America, it's not exactly the same. Now, Santiago, Chile is a very metropolitan place. It's not like some backwater city that, raw sewage is running through the streets. It's very modern, almost kind of European in some ways. But, very modern, big city. It's like the size of Houston. For those of you who haven't been. So, from that angle, it wasn't complete culture shock. It's not like I, went into some jungle village in the Amazon, but it was still very different than what I was used to. For one thing, it was a much bigger city. So Madison is, not even a quarter the size of that from a population perspective or footprint size. I mean, Santiago is nestled in between the mountains, so that was different. It was a much different climate. The seasons are reversed, so I got off the plane in January or February. In Wisconsin, it's bone-chilling cold at that point. Santiago, Chile, it's the middle of the summer, and it was hot. So a lot of things were different, but it was also, there are also some differences. So at the time, certainly, Santiago was not as affluent. I mean, it had affluent neighborhoods, don't get me wrong. A city of that size is always going to. But it also had a lot more not so affluent neighborhoods than I was used to encountering. To the point that I had decided to stay late and study in the library one night at the school I was going to. And by the way, to get to school, I took a bus to a subway station, then took the subway to class. And I think all told, my journey probably took me about 45 minutes because the school I went to was not close to where I lived. But, I stayed late to catch up on some studies because I was too busy having fun when I should have been doing homework. And I go to leave the university and take the train back home, but the train station's closed. I think it was like 10:30 at night or something like that. And across the street, and it was a big street, big busy street, but across the street from the university campus that I was on was a much more like industrial, not super affluent neighborhood. Probably not the worst neighborhood in Santiago, but not the best either. Well, I'm like, crap. Okay, the train station's shut down. How do I get home? So I start trying to catch a bus or a cab. Nobody's stopping. Okay, they're just driving right past. I'm like, I'm at a bus stop. I'm hailing down these cabs. The cabs have their light on like they're open. Why won't they stop? Finally, a cab screeches up, stops. The guy throws the door open and is like, get in. So I hop in and he starts like chewing me out. And he's like, what are you thinking? And I was like, I'm trying to get back from school. And he's like, did you notice that nobody else was stopping for you? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, there's a reason for that. Make sure you don't leave after the subway closes down. It's not safe. And just kind of, he could figure out within a few sentences or shortly after looking at me that I was probably an American. I was probably walking around in a hat like this, like a moron, not blending in whatsoever. And so that was like oh, okay, yeah, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. And so, but that was not something that I ever had to worry about in Madison, Wisconsin. It was like you could walk around at 2 a.m. and feel pretty safe. So it was kind of an eye-opening experience to be like, oh, the entire world isn't like this. You kind of need to pay attention to your surroundings and be observant and maybe not stand out like a turd in a punch bowl. But it also made me value, being at home and having that comfort level and not having to worry about where you go at what time of night. Not as much. There are still places in Madison it's probably not the best idea to go to at 2 a.m, but it's not the same. We'll put it that way. So it made me value that, It made me value the ability to communicate perfectly with everybody I talk to and not worry that I'm going to misunderstand what they're saying or that I'm going to butcher what I'm trying to say. So getting outside of your comfort zone and your bubble can make you like your home a little bit better. And not that there weren't things I loved about Santiago. I still miss it. I still consider it a second home. I'd love to go back sometime. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time there, but there were things that you miss. Like I missed the food we have here. I'd never really thought of the food I'd have in Madison, Wisconsin as a draw, but there were things I could have here and couldn't get there, or it just wasn't the same. So, now I will say I miss empanadas like you would not believe. Oh man, they were so good. Anyway, but you do learn to value things that you have at home. Finally, you learn some new perspectives and you add some tools to your tool belt when you travel enough. So I already mentioned this, but you learn that you're much more adaptable than you realize when you are put into a situation and you're the only person who can get yourself out. And you have to figure it out. It's on you. You realize you're a lot more capable than you thought, and that there's a lot of problems you're capable of overcoming that you never would have believed. Because when you're traveling, not everything goes to plan, and you have to adapt, improvise, and overcome. And realizing you can do that makes you a lot more comfortable taking on new challenges because you're like, I've done this before, or I've done something like this. If I could get through that, I can get through this. Gives you some confidence. And for future trips, you'll learn to prepare better, and you'll learn what things you need to bring with you and what contingency plans to make. So it just gives you a whole bunch of life skills that you would take a lot longer to develop otherwise, or you may never develop. So that's another thing that I think is super important. And then it also gives you different perspectives on what life really is. And this one, now this one, you do have to probably be in an area for a little longer than like a few days. A few weeks or month or a year would benefit you. And by the way, I highly recommend you all take some time and live abroad, whether it's studying abroad in college or going to live in a foreign country and work there for a little while, backpacking through Europe after you graduate high school, whatever it is, take some time and do that. Please do that. And I would highly recommend you do that before you get married and have kids, because it's much harder to do after. But take that opportunity and do it, because not every culture lives the same way. You're going to learn a lot of things that you just thought that's just how things are. That's how everybody is. No, it isn't. That's how Americans are. That's how Midwesterners are. There's a whole lot of other people that live in other places that see it completely differently. And you might find that their perspective and their way of doing things connects better with who you are than the way we've been doing things at home. I've learned that. Yeah, I definitely learned that from my Chilean family. Like, there were things that they believe that I've kind of implemented myself. One thing was tight-knit families. My family was kind of spread to the wind. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, a lot of my extended family is in Ohio, and certainly was when I was growing up. Man, that's just not as common in other places. Like, they'll try to stay much closer together. And, you know, on the weekends, instead of going out and hanging out with your friends, they'd have, you know, huge backyard barbecues with family members. And it'd be like cousins, aunts, uncles, nephews. That's who you spent a lot of time with, those people, and you developed really, really close bonds. And I loved that idea. I'm like, man, that's amazing. It never would have occurred to me. I just didn't think that's how things were done. But that's definitely a cultural thing. And that's part of the reason, you know, your mom and I have chosen to stay in Wisconsin, is we wanted to stay closer to our family, and we wanted to see them more often. We wanted you kids to have a relationship with your grandparents and your aunts and uncles if possible. So you'll find that you bring some of that stuff home with you, and you view life differently after that. And that's a really, really positive experience. That's actually one of the things that I think has made America a really great place, is that kind of melting pot of cultures, and that you do get exposed to different ideas more frequently than you might in some other countries that are a little more homogenous. So this could really be like a 1,000-part series. You know, travel is a big deal to me, but I've still seen this much of the world, and I'd love to see all of it. But those are just some things that I want to get you started thinking about, and maybe you'll understand a little bit better why I view travel the way that I do. But I hope that part I can pass down to you guys, and you'll at least give it a shot and try to push yourself beyond your comfort zone. So that's a lot. There are probably some other things I wanted to get to, but we'll save it for another video. Love you guys lots. See you next time. Bye.